case. I don't know.
Well, I know that,
There's a state off,
oh, maybe I'm thinking of something else.
I think their office used to be down in the tech center, the state. But I'm not sure anymore. I just
Well,
graduated.
I work for the state, I don't really know.
Yeah.
No, I was looking at it all day.
I don't
I'm
know.
tired of it. Plus I was in.
Well, what's, where are we? Oh, Rudy, yeah, we're past. AJ?
It's just too small on a group.
Ready to go?
Yeah.
All right, call to order. What, is this handwritten on me? Is this yours or mine?
That's for you.
Oh, okay. Okay, so call to order,
Chair Watson,
here.
Member Strong,
Present.
Member Chisholm. Present. Member Emmelhans.
Present.
Member Johnson,
Present.
Member Hughes,
Present.
Member Hart.
Here.
All present, and we do have a quorum.
Outstanding. And you wrote on here staff update on the CEAC.
Yep, so based on the request from our last meeting, before we get into any voting or motions, council voted in favor of the removal of Michael Vinson. He has been removed, and Linda Hart has been moved up as a regular member. And she will finish out Michael's term, which will be through the end of this year.
Welcome. Officially.
Well, that's, the terms are in like May or June, right?
It's January. And then,
Oh, that's right, this cycle starts,
Yeah,
that's
June,
right, that's
so.
right. Okay.
Yeah, so now that that's done,
So we will have no more, we will have no alternate until.
yes.
And I think that's good, because that puts us at a good number. So I think we're good. Approval of minutes.
Motion to approve.
I was just gonna ask if anybody want to make a motion. Anybody second?
I second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Ayes have it. Thank you. August 5th council meeting update. So, well, it looks like number 4. Did you have to move number 4 up?
I did, just so we could do the vote
Okay.
for minutes and.
Oh, good point. You're on top of this. All right, Rita, what you got for us?
Not here.
She's dumbfounded
I
tonight.
know. Wow, we are just burning
What about
through this.
I do not have anyone from public.
Yeah.
No.
Sorry. Subcommittee update. All magazine.
I was tasked to reach out to Chris Hargett and make a couple of tweaks to this. Reached out to him, he never got back to me, and I failed to follow up on my own. So it is as it read when we looked it over at the last meeting.
Oh, well, that was good.
So it's not, there's
Very
nothing
good.
wrong with it, it's solid. But just a couple things I think that we were gonna rotate around a little bit. Actually, you know what, it did get rotated because Code Compliance Month was up at the top of this originally. So he must have, because I made a couple suggestions and they must have taken them on, so, okay, good. And that's it.
Very good.
That's how
Thank you.
quick we did
That's,
this.
no, that's really good. I mean, yeah, that's good. Nice job. You guys rock. Okay, unfinished business. I'm just laughing because we're going so fast. We're already, this is number 7.
Wow.
I know. Well, no, there was one time. It was during an election when we just walked in elections and left. That was the record, I think. I guess it could have been worse.
Discussion towards the end.
What's that?
There's more discussion towards the end.
Oh, okay. New business. Well, there's no unfinished business, so new business, Board of Elections for chair and vice chair.
So I have received one nomination to nominate Robert Watson as the chair and Rick Emmelhans as the vice chair.
I motion that we accept those nominations.
Those in favor, except for me and him.
I think we
Aye.
can do too.
No, you can vote.
Okay.
Who seconded?
Anybody opposed?
Mike seconded,
I
yes.
second.
Second.
Yeah.
Okay. You just don't go too slow here. We're burning this thing. So, all right. It sounds like everybody approves, so we're good. So thank you.
Thank you.
Congratulations.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
All right, we are
Congratulations.
clicking through this meeting.
We are.
All right.
Gosh, darn. Discuss the starting points to review the municipal code at a high level for general understanding. So, go ahead. You were gonna talk.
So last meeting, you guys wanted to discuss a starting point to start review code for more understanding, not necessarily to go through it all. So that's where this is opened up to see what section we want to start in. Title 7 for the dog ordinances in that has just been redone in the last few years. So if there's another section that you want to start with, either in Title 11 or in Title 15, that's something for you guys to
AJ,
discuss.
7.2 is lost and abandoned property. Do you do anything with that?
No, that would be covered under PD.
Okay, all right. I was just going through them, trying to find them too, and I just thought, wasn't sure if that was something that code did. So I'm looking at 11.3, 11.32, 11.34, 11.42, 11.51, 11.54, and 11.62. Does that sound about right? Snow and ice is 2. Encroachment and permits, do you do anything with that, having to do the fences there? Okay, so that's out.
We don't do anything with that? Who
No
does that?
fences?
Fences and all that's done under community development.
It's what?
Community development.
Okay.
11.42, park and city-owned property, authority to govern animal. Is that you? Is that
That's us, yeah.
Is it?
So that's under the park rules and regulations for that. We do have the ability on city property to regulate, and that would be under the park rules, which is the Parks and Rec Commission.
11.51, trees and shrubs. That's us. 11.54, public responsibility for public right-of-way. That's us.
I have a question on that one. Real quick, so I was walking in last week and there was somebody, they have their entire sidewalk is lined with tree or shrubs.
Right.
Very well kept. They're like 6 foot, dead straight. They're about that far over on the sidewalk. Straight up, I mean, so there's one section of sidewalk that doesn't matter on Huron, but then on Radcliffe, I don't remember, but on that one street, it's very narrow and you can't walk on the sidewalk. Is there something because they do keep it really nice. They just keep letting it grow a little more and then cut it and then let it grow a little more and cut it. And it's probably not them, but what do you wouldn't even notice if you looked at it.
Yeah, so how it's written is that for the right of way, that any trees, shrubs, or anything has to be maintained on the sidewalk, right of way, anything like that. So as long as it's maintained is one aspect of it, but then there's the ADA compliance side of it, that it still has to be passable. So if it is maintained but growing over, even if it's on some of our larger sidewalks, as long as it's passable and maintained, it would be in compliance. If it's on some of the older sidewalks, that's where, even though if they maintain it all the way back to their fence line, it's still technically super narrow, and that's where it gets challenging.
Okay. I just was curious because you think about these things now when you're on here and then you're walking around and you go, oh, that's kind of weird. I can't walk on this sidewalk yet this is very trim, nice and clean. So.
Can I chime in?
Sure.
Because I listened to Rick at the last meeting. He said we all ought to take a look at the code and do some reading. So I broke down and went in and I just read like the first 2 sections of section 15, or I think it was. I got to tell you, it was very interesting. It was very understandable. There wasn't anything in there that was over my head. And when I read through it, I started to get a sense of logic of what they were trying to do, what's code all about. I also got respect for you guys, AJ, because as I'm just reading that intro, guess what? I go for a walk in my neighborhood, and there's code violations everywhere.
Yeah.
And it's just like you said, Rob, some of them aren't that bad. Actually, some of them kind of look good, but according to my understanding, those are violations. So it's got to be a tough call for you guys.
Yeah.
I mean, you only have so many staff, you only have so many people, so I mean, you could, if you were looking for code violations, you'd find more code violations than you wanted to find. What I'm getting to in all this, it leads to this kind of discussion, and I think it gives us some awareness as to what the officers deal with. How do they prioritize this problem? Do I let it slip, or do I go after the squeaky wheel? If a neighbor reports it on Angle Fix, that's so. In fairness to the department,
Yeah.
they got a tough job.
Oh, I-
They got all this universe, and like I said, some of the violations probably don't bother anybody, and I've also seen some that do. There's a street I walk down in my neighborhood, and they finally trimmed it, but the tree overhang the sidewalk. So when you're walking, you have to
Yeah.
get
Yeah.
down.
There's,
And I was gonna take a pair of clippers one day and just go clip it, because it would take 5 minutes. But that's not my property, and that's not my right. But that's an example, I think, of what you're saying, Rob. When is intervention
yeah,
called for,
well,
and when is it not?
and it's their resources too.
Yeah,
I mean, their resources could be out on calls all day instead of going and looking at the, because you guys take up zones that you need to cover, right? So so instead of doing what they should be doing, they have to go do things and respond as opposed to, or they have to react as opposed to be proactive. So, but yeah, I get it. I do. And
Well, I think you're talking about blatant stuff and
Yeah.
things that, like walking my dog, I couldn't even get by the sidewalk. I had to walk around.
in the street, and that's not
Yeah,
right.
and that's not right.
No.
I mean, it's blatant. And I think those are the things that you deal with.
I think they're very fair, like they went through my neighborhood and they only chose like the top 10-15% worst yards with the worst violations to give notices on their windows.
Yeah,
And I was like, I thought it was very fair because
So
there was
they-
young people, especially young people living there, and they should be taking care of their units.
No, I have a people that, so I've lived in my house for 33 years. I know I don't look that old, you don't have to say it.
I was gonna say, you're
So-
35, what's the deal?
I know. So I lived in that house over 33 years, and the people were there when I got there. And their yard is just not good. And you guys scared them into submission. Because now you can walk on the sidewalk, they go out there and they clear the shrubs away from everything. I mean,
good.
so I would like to.
That's what it's about.
Exactly. So I don't know what you guys did, but
But there's another piece of it too.
what I wanted to say, Rob, is the exercise of us, and we could read one section a month, or, I mean, we don't have to read the whole thing. But if we all read a chunk and then talked about it at the next meeting, I think that would help all of us understand more what's going on out there.
well, an option too that, and I don't remember because it was a couple of years ago, but at least Dave had, or somebody had, where they had done synopsis of different sections of the code. They had a slide thing that he would put up there and do. Do you still have that? Is it still accurate, or does that not work?
We'd probably have to go through it because with Code Next and the new Title 16, a lot of stuff has changed and moved.
Okay.
Even a lot of the stuff in Title 11 has moved into Title 15 with the trees that was discussed last year. So there's a lot of stuff that has moved if it's more than probably 2 years old.
Okay.
That's
And
something
that's-
we could go through.
Well, but to what Mike's point, I think what Mike said is probably best then, because if you don't have the accurate, I mean, we only meet once a month, so we have the time that we have. And in order to try to at least do as much as we can during that time, if we had synopsis, then we could read it and then go over the synopsis in meeting, that would be great, but if they're not up to date, then pre-reading a section and then coming in and people making notes or us talking about it might be the best way to do it.
Can we do it by subject?
You know, they're broken out pretty cleanly in the code.
But sometimes there's more than one code, or more than one section of a code that will deal with a subject. You think you've got it all, but here's a section over here that affects that code.
Sure.
We had that issue and
There's a couple.
So there's a lot of nuances within, depending on the type of violation. For example, scrapping, junk, trash and litter, and dumping. Those are all in different sections. They're all their own standing, but they all interlink because, I mean, what one person's trash is another person's treasure type of deal. So there's always that issue of, well, this isn't junk or scrap, I'm using it for this project. Well, that was 5 years ago. And so then you have to go in, okay, well, it's usable materials, but then you have to go into either like the landscaping section that actually gives you a time frame of how many days you can keep that outside for a project. So there's a lot that link to each other, but they affect multiple sections.
okay, so when you come across an issue and you've got somebody new, what do you use to be able to tell them, you know, this is a problem, we see a problem over here, these are the sections of the code that deal with that? What would that person go to find all that area on that would maybe affect their tickets or however they handle this one thing? And what would you suggest as far as a format to look at this thing?
To look at it, I think hitting it pretty much section by section and working your way through is going to be the best bet. The overlap, if this one's valid, then this one's not type of deal, doesn't really happen.
Okay.
Or if you have this one, then you also have this section. That outside of Title 15, because Title 15 is nuisance, so everything in that title is considered a nuisance. That's the only overlap, but that's all within the one section.
Okay.
So you can look at each standing section separate. I mean, for example, if you want to look at 1154 for property owner's responsibility of public right of way. That is a standalone section because it's responsibility for the right of way, but that could also fall into grass and weeds. That could also fall under trees. That could also fall under materials obstructing. So that one section is still a standalone, but there could be other violations that are tied to it.
Okay, gotcha.
I think she had a good question too. It was the early part, so I don't think we got to it, but how do you guys train a new person that comes in on that?
So very similar to grass and weeds that we've been talking about. It's basically our best guess for a lot of these things. Like I brought up the scrap materials, junk or trash. We don't know what it is. So that's a situation just like grass and weeds. If that's something we don't know if it's native and they planted it, that's their intention. If they've planted it and they haven't weeded it, that's where we will go ahead and issue the violation to the best of our guess. If it is, say, an inoperable vehicle, we get these all the time, where they're covered, but they're on jack stands and the tires are off the ground. Well, we're going to ride them on private property for an inoperable vehicle. Now we get a phone call from that property owner and they go, no, this is a classic car. It's currently registered. It's on jacks because I don't want the tires getting flat spots because I don't drive it that often. Because it is licensed, it is roadworthy, it is still a legal vehicle. You're allowed to have it covered on your property. At that point, that's where we would work with the property owner to go, no, this is fully legal. But from the first pass, it doesn't look legal. So that's where, just like grass and weeds, I mean, snow and ice is pretty easy. That's our example of a cut and dry one. But the rest is honestly our best guess of knowing the code and going, you know what, this is what our best guess for the violation is, and then working with the property owner to figure out, well, no, that's not trash. I'm not waiting for it to be part of my weekly removal. This is what it's actually for. And that's where then, okay, well, we'll go ahead and remove those trash issues and saying, okay, well, now it's going to be outdoor storage. You have this many days to get rid of it based on the code. And sometimes we never know what it is because we get no communication.
You talked last time about half of residences in Inglewood are rentals?
About half.
Okay. Who do you notify when there's a violation? Do you notify the owner or do you notify the resident? It's a resident, isn't it?
So per municipal code, it is the owner or occupant of the property that's responsible. So we do our best to notify both, unless we know that this property is vacant. You go put your notice on, you look in the window and the house is completely empty. That's when we're gonna focus on the property owner, to try to get best contact. Unfortunately, a lot of our rental properties in the city are under LLCs, and those property owners list their mailing address as the property address. So if we send it out, it gets returned right back to us as undeliverable because there's no one there if it's a vacant property. And so we'll leave the notice on the door and hopefully someone swings by and checks it.
Wow.
Similar thing for vacant properties that are being sold. Our team's really good. It's not a requirement, but we will, if there's a for sale sign with the realtor's number, we'll reach out to the realtor because they can always get a hold of the owner who they're selling it for and let them know if there's any violations and take care of it that way because we don't know if the owner's moved out of state, especially when the mailing address comes back to that property.
I think in the last year or two, we've heard a couple things, snow removal, absentee landlord, they live in Texas. We can't get through to them. There's an abandoned house in my neighborhood, weeds in the yard. I'm gonna guess it's a similar thing. Could code be revised in any way to put some teeth into it so that, it seems strange to me that the city of Englewood cannot track down an owner in Texas or somewhere and hold them accountable. It's like a black hole. So it doesn't make sense to me. Somebody owns it, somebody's paying taxes on it, and somebody should be fined or held accountable. It sounds like that doesn't exist today for Englewood.
Not really. The best that we can do is if we're able to abate the property, depending on the violation, is abate it, and then send that to the county for a tax lien.
So if I reported a house it's obviously deserted, it's got plywood on the windows, and it's got 6-inch weeds or whatever everywhere, code enforcement would go to that address, then what would you do? I mean, there's nobody home. What follow-up do you do after that?
So we would still have to follow municipal code with the posting. We
Okay,
post the property, we have to mail it to the owner of record per the county assessor. And then once that 2 weeks of the posting notice is over, at that point, if we aren't able to contact anyone, that's when we'd look for an abatement of the property.
okay. And there is another example of you guys could proactively do that, or you could wait for me and my neighbors to send a letter or a notice to you guys and say, hey, go to that property and take a look. And I would understand why you're not going after all of the empty buildings in Englewood. But, so there is a process. So if there is an empty building, or if there is a landlord who doesn't clean the sidewalk after a snowstorm, ultimately there is a way to hold them accountable.
Yes, yeah, through an abatement, and if they don't pay that because they can't be notified,
Okay.
then yes, it would go to the county for a tax lien at that
Okay.
point. There is new legislation that should be brought to council, I'm imagining before next year. That's being pushed by the city manager's office for a vacant or abandoned property registration. And that would, if it moves forward and approved by council, that would mandate that any property that is vacant or abandoned within certain requirements would actually have to be registered with the city, and that would go along with fees. And then part of that would be that they have to maintain compliance of the property. And if they don't, that would be an additional violation that the city would be able to enforce on them.
Is that likely to happen?
From my understanding, it is being moved forward. And with that, there is that possibility of that additional funding, of possible additional enforcement of those properties. Very similar, it's been talked about. Boulder has a big program on it. Again, it's a college town, so it's a little different for rental property inspections. The code enforcement in Boulder is under their building department. And so they actually have an entire team separate that just does rental inspections. So that's where they hold the rental properties accountable.
Sure.
The owners make sure it's safe and all that type of stuff. So that is the other aspect that has been talked about, not sure where that's going, to hold these properties accountable.
It makes sense
I've
to
got,
do that.
this is kind of a weird one to me, but we are seeing more and more short-term rentals in the area. And I don't know that the owners of those properties necessarily pass on any sort of understanding of the sort of codes and procedures of our neighborhood, of our area. And grass isn't the issue, but the strangest thing is that these people, from the ones that I've seen, don't know to take in their trash cans in the next day. And those trash cans will sit out there like all week. And we finally pull them inside. Is that something that that code deals with? I mean,
They deal with it, but there's nothing they can do because the window's 7 days on trash cans. You
I
have
thought it
7,
was 24 hours.
Well, yeah, for trash cans on the curb, it's 24 hours.
Right.
Pre and post pickup time.
Okay.
why was I thinking 7 days?
And for that example, if we know it's a short-term rental and they do have violations that are reoccurring, there's a property east of Broadway that we were dealing with for quite a while that had multiple violations and that, but we would actually refer those violations to community development. They manage a short-term rental program and let them know of these violations. And then it would be up to them either for renewing the license or for possible revocation of the license because they're failing to follow municipal code. And police are getting called out there for parties or
Right.
anything like that.
Other
That's still
issues, yeah.
something under the licensing standards for a short-term rental. They still have to be within certain requirements. So that's something that we have had properties that we've done multiple inspections on, properties that have been changed illegally for short-term rentals, and then properties that just aren't licensed as short-term rentals. We'll work with community development to either do those inspections or to refer those to them to contact the owners and go, this property's not in compliance, this is what you need to do to take care of it.
I don't know why I was thinking 7 days.
How much is a license for a short-term rental? Do you know?
I do not know.
So what do we want to
So
do?
where do we start? Yeah.
So, well, that's a good question. So I kind of like the idea of the sections that you have here, this snow and ice removal might, so it's August, our next meeting's in September. I mean, that's what we should start probably, or, yeah.
Let me ask you a question, Rob.
Yeah.
How long, I mean, in my mind, I see us as putting a finite time on this. In other words, we're going to take a year to review these. So we're going to pick a couple every meeting. What do you see as
Well, I think getting
that process?
in the sections that are coming up as opposed to like doing weeds at this point.
Right.
That's not, I mean, it's gonna be irrelevant by the time we talk about it. If we find something that we want changed, it'll be too late. So if we do start now with the snow and ice, that's why I was,
Let's do snow and ice.
yeah, so, I mean, that's a good one to start with too. Because unfortunately, that one's a very short turnaround on what they can do. Because it's the 24-hour notice, or you got 24 hours till after the snow stops, but then usually they're not gonna get to it right away, and within the next 12 hours, it's melting on its own. So there's things that can be looked at there.
See, I used to have, I have all these neighbors, I used to have a neighbor that just left it out there all the time. So I mean, they just left it out there. So if I called Engelfix, they'd go to day one and they'd see it out there. And I just a question, AJ, so what, you would mind? I mean, I get Rob's point. It's like, you have a time frame you're allowed to work within in terms of response. This was a permanent homeowner. They just left it out there 24/7. So how would you deal with that? I mean, would that hit your radar, or is it It's confusing to me, because like, which week are we talking about? And then they say, oh, no, I brought it in and then I just put it out there. You know what I'm saying? You can get into that conversation of, are you leaving it there 24/7 or are you moving it? So it's almost like you guys have to go by every day to see if it's out there.
For the trash containers?
Yeah.
Yeah, so, I mean, for that, residential by license for trash haulers in the city, residential pickup is Monday and Wednesday.
Right.
Except on holidays or by special permission
Okay.
of licensing.
Right.
So that's where if we get a complaint Sunday, Monday, or Tuesday for certain properties,
Okay.
it's determining what days their trash service.
Okay.
Most residential trash service in the city is Wednesday.
Okay.
So that's something that we know a lot of the companies, like Waste Management, if you're in the city, is a Wednesday pickup.
Okay.
So if we see a trash container out, if it's complained on Tuesday and it's complained on Thursday, well, that's still within the 24 hours. However, if it's still there Friday,
Yeah.
now it's a violation.
Okay.
And that's something where they may be complying with, and we see this all the time, unfortunately, they remove it, now they're in compliance, and then it's back out.
Right.
But now if this is an issue where we're getting complaints, that's where nuisance would come in. Because this is an ongoing, that the property owner it's an ongoing issue which falls under nuisance at that point. So if we do have enough complaints, if it is enough of an issue, at that point, we would move forward with a nuisance ticket.
Okay.
Because this is a nuisance to the community, that this violation is just ongoing.
Same with snow?
So snow and ice, last year was the first full year, I believe, that it was redone and snow and ice has been decriminalized. So how snow and ice works is that at the end of the grace period, if there's still snow out, they will get a first and final notice. And it's completely different than the grass and weed notice or any other notice we have. It's specifically to snow and ice, and it says first and final notice. You will only receive one notice per snow season. And then code enforcement will go out the first few big storms, talk to people, issue the notices, especially people we can't get in contact with. Then the next storm, if there's any violations, it's an automatic ticket. And those tickets are issued to the property if we can't contact anyone. So we fill out the ticket on site. If we can't contact anyone, it's put on their door. And then whoever the property owner is would be responsible ultimately for coming into court, regardless if it's a rental or anything else.
Yeah, I think that's a good one to start with.
Yep.
Gonna jump in here again. This list I have is a little deceptive because I lumped all of Title 15 together, and there's a lot in Title 15. Matter of fact, it's mostly Title 15. So if we want to chunk away at it, we might want to pick a couple things that we can, be prepared to talk about. I mean, it's a little homework for everybody, but I think that if you've at least, and I think, AJ, maybe something that would be very helpful if we do this, is that when you put together the agenda for that week, is to put the links directly into those so that we can then read those directly from the review that we have for the agenda. Does that make sense? And that way we know what specifically we're going to be.
Could you do the links?
But the agenda just comes out a week before the meeting.
Well, and I
Is that
can,
enough time?
That's enough time for
as
me.
long as I can get it done, if we want to get it approved and send it out 2 weeks early, my deadline is the Thursday at noon before a meeting.
Yeah, no,
So
I'm
if we
good.
want to get it out earlier, I'm more than happy as long as scheduling and time allows.
Links would be
Um,
helpful.
And then if you look at, just for your own reference, if you look at 651, that actually states what titles and sections code enforcement's responsible for. So there's 9 titles that code enforcement has a part in. So if you take each title, 11 and 15 would probably be 2 meetings. It does list Title 16. We can do the enforcement. However, community development is the primary investigator, so 16's out. If that's something that you want to look at each title, in the agenda, I can just include the sections that we cover because there's a lot that are intermixed.
Right.
And so for the agenda, I can include the ones that correspond directly with code enforcement and that you could look at, and then we can go from there.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's helpful.
that'd be
And we can
fantastic.
start there. If it does become too much of a burden on time, we may have to change it.
I was gonna say, I know what Dave would be saying,
Right.
okay? He would be saying, we don't want to use up your time. So we're happy to do whatever makes the most sense for you, I think.
Yeah, and if it's strictly just listing them out and attaching them, and it may be an hour or so to do that.
Okay.
To summarize and do anything else like that, that may be a little bit more,
No,
that
no,
wants to
no,
be done.
no,
You don't
no,
need to do
You
that.
don't need
no,
to do
But yeah, if it's just, because I'll put all of them into a PDF and to link them, and then just link that section under the agenda, as long as I don't have to break each one of them out separately. I can link all of them together under one title and put that in the agenda with no issue.
And I personally would like to see the actual language, summarizing them is great, but I think that when it comes to talking with our citizens about that, we want to make sure we understand what that language is, because they may have a question
That's
about
good.
that.
Yeah, and in our municipal code, that's done through, I believe it's still Lexipol. We can actually go in, select all the codes we want from that title, and basically print a PDF, and it will take the exact wording and everything and just put it in a PDF document.
That's ideal.
So I don't have to type anything or anything like that, and it's exactly how it is written. There may be some changes, just as a caveat. They're about 6 months behind on updating certain sections. So just until like 4 months ago, in Title 1154, 1155 was the tree section, which has now been moved to Title 15. So that was just updated, even though that was a last year change. So there may be a few of those. Those are in process, but that's something we can absolutely just attach and review.
So,
I really like it because for me, I can highlight,
I think that's a good.
if you're the class instructor, I could bring that back to the next meeting and say, what the heck does that mean? Doesn't that conflict with page 2? I would get a lot out of that. And then frankly, I'd probably just keep those pages in my own binder, so it's a quick reference that I could go through. But it does strike, when Linda first chimed in on the whole issue of code and who wrote this code anyways? What's it trying to do? I really think it could help us get to that. And if we made a recommendation, we'd know what ground we're standing. We could say, we read the code, we understand it. We think council ought to consider this one modification or whatever. But right now, I couldn't say that. I wouldn't even know how to begin.
AJ, what would you think of doing, 7.1 is animals?
Yes.
Okay, we could take maybe 7.1 and snow removal, 11.3.2, something like that. At least get our feet wet with it.
Yeah, because if we go like little section, we take like 2 years or something.
That's just it,
More
yeah.
to-
I'm in favor of trying.
Yeah,
to see where-
let's start with these two and then, I mean, if we can bulk it up more the following time, we can, but let's see where we stand.
Why don't you,
Yeah.
I'll
why don't you include
warn you,
6.51
the
also?
animal code is quite complex. We
Yeah.
spent 2.5 years revising it the first time. I don't know how long you took this
It was
time.
about
but-
a year and a half this last go around.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's a recent one too?
Yes.
Yeah, that was a
So
recent
that's
one.
good to know.
Yeah, and that's a good one, just to sort of read through and see how stuff has changed. That's been updated. A lot of Title VII had to be updated because our municipal code was set up specifically for dogs and cats, a lot of it. The biggest change going through that section was changing a lot of the things just to animals in general. And then within that was making a lot of it match and mimic state law. Because there was a lot of issues with sort of out of date, out of policy for the state aspects of animal welfare in that. So that was a lot of what the changes are. But that's an absolute good section to go through, read, understand. Should be quick to read, understand. I don't know if there's gonna be a lot of recommendation for changes or accepted changes. Because right now it's really robust and there's not many issues with that section.
And I think our intent is not necessarily to, put an eye towards, maybe we should change. It's mostly just getting used to it, understanding the code.
Yeah.
That's huge.
And that's something I can work with Dave too. Now that we sort of know a little bit more how you want to go through it. For the October meeting, we can start with these two sections. And then I can go through with Dave through all the titles and try to put together a master PDF.
Great.
Get that out to everyone so we have. And then on the agendas, it'll just be, we're gonna review code with as much time as you want or wherever you wanna stop. And that way it's not, well, this is a quick one, we're done in 15 minutes, and then the next one, we don't even get halfway through it. You guys can work at your own pace at that point. So if that's something you're interested in, I can work on that. October gives us quite a bit of deadline. So hopefully we can get a sort of a master PDF of all the codes, and then you can just work through the lists at your leisure.
So we would start in September or October?
So September we'll start with Title VII and snow and ice. And then for the hopefully before the October meeting, I can get the master one out.
Great.
Hopefully I can get it out before September, and then you can decide what sections you want to look at or start with in October.
Oh, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Just so everyone could read ahead, and that way you're not waiting on me for the agenda of what
Right.
sections you want to do for that meeting. In case something comes up or if there's another issue that we need to schedule.
Can you put 651 in there also, so we've got the sort of overview?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
And we don't, is there anything we need to do to change to get the agenda out a week early, so for 2 weeks instead of one?
I will.
I just didn't know if there was something to be voted on.
No,
or-
No, we're just regulated on the time that that we have to have it out by city policy.
Right.
And that's most board and commissions will publish it that Thursday before. That's just sort of how everything works, just in case there's any changes or anything. But if that's what we want to do, I'll get the agenda typed up, the minutes typed up and all that as soon as possible, get it out to you. And then as soon as you approve it, if everyone's in agreement, I can publish it at that point. So.
That sounds good.
Cool. Concern I have possibly, and I guess, we talked about, a couple of us talked about this later, is that without having sort of a time frame of how long we should be spending on things, we could be doing this for hours, that maybe what we can do, and Rob, if you're up to maybe doing this, is taking a look at each section of the agenda and putting a time frame on it. So that when we are doing the review of code, we know we've got 30 minutes, and that, so we're not overtaxing ourselves. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah.
I'd like to see that happen. You're okay with that?
Or
Yeah,
or
we
we
could-
vote if we want to spend more time.
Yeah, I mean, vote, sure, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah,
We're in a good roll. Let's keep
yeah, I
on.
like that idea.
Yeah,
And if that's something that if you want to limit, like review a code to an hour for every meeting, and then any other business would be in like 30 minutes before, 30 minutes after. If that's something during the meeting, if you want to keep track of, all right, we're going to review code time, I can let you know when, hey, your hour's up in 5 minutes. If you want to keep going, you can. If not, that's up to the group as a whole to decide if you want to do it that way as well.
Agreed. Is that
yeah,
deal?
no, I think that's good. If that works, the only kink in there would be if there was any public comment, but we can work around that. I mean, that's our number one priority is that.
And public comment may guide where you'd like to go as well, or what
It
you'd like
could,
to review.
What's the deadline for public comment submission, or is it just people walking in? Is that,
So online, public comment is due noon the day of the meeting.
okay,
And then you can always have walk-in. I think our longest public comment lasted like 42 or 43 minutes. So that 30 minutes before, 30 minutes after, I think would be a reasonable.
Yeah, that was the tree on the border and the fence.
and grass. The grass was
Yes.
great.
Can I ask one question, kind of a specific? Who's responsible for the trees along the alley that are outside of the person's property? The trees kind of lining the alley.
So if it's on an alley, it is the adjacent owner occupant responsibility.
Okay, it's not power company. I'm just concerned, my alley, and I was complaining about too much oversight. I noticed the other day I was back there and the trees are just getting really low, and I'm worried about them hitting those power lines because they're right on top of them. And I didn't know if Public Service went through and did those, or?
So who owns the trees and is ultimately responsible is the adjacent property owner
Okay.
or occupant.
Okay.
However, if they are interfering, Excel will not allow any uncertified arborist or tree company within 10 to 15 foot of their power lines.
Okay.
So if it's within 10 to 15 feet of the power lines, that's something where the resident can call Excel. Anyone can call and report an address with a tree in the wires.
Okay.
And then Excel will send out their contractors that are certified to work within that range of the live lines with specialty equipment to trim that out. Once they trim
That's-
that
that's
out,
needed.
then it would be up to the resident or occupant to do further trimming at that point.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, but Excel will protect their lines if it's something growing in, and that's only the lines between the poles. If it's
Yeah.
between the pole and the house, that is owned by the property.
Yeah, well, these trees are growing right up into the power lines.
Yeah, so contact Excel for that, and they're normally anywhere 2 to 3 week turnaround on getting to those sooner now.
You don't want
Okay, thank
people with clippers or electric shears up there.
Yeah, I don't think I'd want to.
Yeah, the last thing somebody would say would be, oops.
Yeah.
You know, trees love it because if there's a light or anything like that, they just grow like crazy with those mercury vapor lights.
Never thought about that.
Yeah.
I didn't think about that.
Okay, thanks.
That's a good point. I didn't even think about that. Okay, so we've got the ones for next time, the 651, 1132, and 71. So we'll get those incorporated. Thank you for doing that, because I know, sadly, I mean, like some of that work falls on you and I feel bad.
That's what I was told to do, I guess.
Okay. All right, is there anything else around the municipal codes that we want to do for our review? Anything else?
Just something to think about. Again, as I was reading through it, certain things were making sense. Somewhere in the future, the city's going to probably make some type of decision statement relating to native grasses, perennials, et cetera. And one of the discussions that has happened in this group and on the Sustainability Commission is, or it just came up, what about the alleys? And when I was first asked that question, I said, I don't know, we haven't talked about the alleys. Having done my little bit of homework, I have an opinion, and this again, in the future, I think this may come to our attention. I don't think anybody should be planting gardens in the alley. It's just too hard to administer. So for example, if I'm into sustainability and I want to put native plants and grasses, I do it in my front yard. I don't think it makes sense for me to argue with the city and say, I'm going to put my pollinator garden in that little strip next to the alley between the fence. Again, I got sympathetic to your point of view, which is give me a break. We're being told from a nuisance point of view, these alleys are to be clean. I get that, that's safety, you know. So again, I just throw it out. From reading some of these basic things in section 15 under nuisances, it started to click for me. I thought, well, yeah. So if we were having this discussion a year from now, that's probably my point of view, which is if there's 3 people in Englewood that want to fight over their right to have a pollinator garden in their alley, next to their fence, next to the alley, I don't have a lot of consideration for that.
But what is the problem with something like that?
The problem with having a pollinator garden on the alley?
Yeah.
Well, A, I think it's impractical. And B,
Well, if that person is taken care of it.
well, the same logic that says, hey, code enforcement, keep the weeds 6 inches or low, which is a logical safety measure, to me would apply to a pollinator garden.
Why?
You know, if it doesn't make sense for you to have
I don't think so.
weeds and this high, why would it make sense for you to have a flower garden with flowers this high?
Because they're not regulated under the,
Yeah.
they're
So-
not under the they don't fall under the code. They,
So
you can, because if you look at what you're talking about, then nobody could have sunflowers.
exactly, well, I would say they
Those,
shouldn't.
well, and then if the people that are on the alley are responsible for keeping the alley up to code, I don't see why they can't put it.
They could be 6-inch sunflowers.
Well, but as long as they do the right, as long as it's kept up,
Yeah.
and it's not
I've
a
seen
mess.
some beautiful
I
alleys.
bring it up as an example.
Is it on their
Flowers
property
and
or the alley?
Zero touch.
Well, it's their
type
property up to
flowers
where
that
the
It's an
inside
example of the
They're
kind of
responsible.
They're responsible. But if
And there
it's
are
in
alley
the
houses.
I don't want
alleys,
to vote on it.
No, I know.
Yeah,
But
yeah,
it's,
how
so,
these things
I actually,
intersect.
I have a question, that brought up something I've been thinking about, and keep forgetting to bring up, the Inglewood ditch. The houses along the ditch. Yeah, there are entire gardens in there. Sure. That people have set up, and I don't mean like they just, chilled out some land, or chilled out some of it and then planted flowers. They have huge flower boxes back there where they're just, and that ain't their property.
It's a case, I'm just saying, as we get smarter about code, these conversations
So we're gonna
become
ask,
more relevant.
we're gonna ask
You know
more
what I'm saying?
crazy questions is what you're saying.
I think it's good. I just say,
No.
reading the code and
I get it.
thinking it through is a healthy exercise. And maybe this will never even come up. But if it did, I'd like to think this group has their feet on the ground. And if you're gonna argue a position, you have some logic behind it. And you can-
Bill, I think, Mike, you're right. I think that part of what we'll do with this process is we're
Right.
going to dig deep. We're going to get into the weeds. No pun intended.
Yes,
But
you
I
did.
think the
Yes, you did.
yeah, I really did.
You did.
But I think that we have the time, the devoted time to say, okay, we're going to talk about this. Let's debate it. Because your position is a logical one. Other people have different positions.
Exactly.
And it doesn't necessarily mean we're going to, go to council and say, hey, we want to change this. But let's, and I think AJ and I think you and Dave can bring sort of the perspective to this to say, here's where this came from. Here's the history. And that's what we're going to need to hear from you is how did you get to this point?
Right.
Those are important points.
Yes.
And there's nuances that they control that while not necessarily written or how they actually.
How they're executed.
Yeah, and so we need that information as well.
Perfect example, this actually just came up this summer, with alley, gardens in the alley and that. So it's not in municipal code under the code enforcement section, but under the public works and utilities section, it actually is covered. So an alley, is an 8-foot easement from the center of the alley to the property line. Developed roads are 16-foot easement, public right of way from the center line over. And so because of that, we had an issue this summer where Public Works was out with their grader, in the alley, like they do in certain areas every year, and the grader took out all the irrigation, the flowers, everything from this flower bed that was put in the alley. And the resident got very upset. We destroyed all this stuff, water ran, all that. City's not replacing that because that is an easement, it needs to be kept clear. And as part of the easement regulations, technically the alley is owned by the property, but it's an alley easement, so they own it, but they can't build on it. And so it's no different than the city ditches. And that's something that's managed by South Platte Renew and the Allen Water Plant. They work on that, they maintain those, they have certain state regulations on, you'll notice some of the reservoirs, they do get longer grass and weeds because they actually have regulations under the state, and I just found this out last year, of when they can go on it, when they can cut it, what vegetation has to remain, not to ruin the integrity of the actual dam. So that's where if you notice they're longer or they're not out there cutting, it's because the soil is too wet, or they just planted additional grasses and that to build the integrity of that structure. Same thing with the ditches, that utilities is aware of them, they patrol those all the time. Unfortunately, a lot of those people that have those gardens along the open ditches, if the plan moves forward and when it does to close in all the city ditches with pipeline, those are all going to be destroyed while they do that construction. The pipeline gets buried, it'll be covered all over, and then they'd be able to do it because it is an easement. So that brings up your point.
And that's all I'm saying. We need to understand that. That's all. I'm not saying to vote on anything. I'm not saying, there's a lot to this. And the more we know, the more effective we can be. That's all. That's a great example.
Yeah, and that's also, if we do get into 1154 with the responsibility of public right-of-way, and we want to bring in a representative from Public Works to talk about their struggles with alley grading, keeping it clean. Unfortunately, we're seeing a lot more issues this year because trash companies decided they're no longer going through the alleys. So the tree overgrowth, the bush overgrowth, all that this year, we can't keep up with it because we're no longer getting those 1 or 2 leaves a week by 4 or 5 different trash companies taking off. And so now the alleys, the trees are getting completely overgrown because you're not having those oversized vehicles go through. Our code also limits it to, we get calls every year for people who store camper trailers or RVs in their backyard. Well, they can't get down the alley with their oversized vehicle because it's scraping at their tree branches. That's not covered under the code. Under the code for an alley easement, it just has to be a regular passenger vehicle for clearance.
Okay.
So those people who do have those huge fifth wheels with the ACs on top and they can't get to their backyard because the tree's overgrown, sorry, but it's passable for a normal vehicle and that's what we have to enforce. So those are the deeper conversations that this group can talk about and bring out as well.
I did not know that part. I don't have an alley, so either.
And I'm glad I don't.
So, me too, but the alleys are gonna be an interesting eye opener, I think. For some of us, not all of us.
I don't, my alley, when I went down it, was kind of like, okay, now we're out of control, so. But, it needs some care, but those trees are the.
I know
really
somebody you can
concerns
talk
me.
to.
Yeah, I do.
Now you have a friend in the alley.
And we do have our seasonal officer is out doing inspections, issuing notices and that. We're roughly about 500 to 800 notices from this month.
We only have one.
Yes.
Last year we had 2, didn't we?
We have not been able to hire anyone, so we still have 1 position available. We just are not getting applicants or anyone that's qualified to pass the background to get
What do you
hired.
pay them?
I'd have to double check, but I believe it's somewhere right around 21 an hour.
You want to do it?
So is it still posted?
It is.
Just saying.
I sometimes feel like I wish I had those notices when I'm taking walks with
This
dogs.
it could be your job. You could get paid to go get those
I think
people.
it's a little bit of a conflict, isn't
Well, probably. It would be satisfying.
it? You would think that some people would, college kids now, they're going back to school, but.
Oh, they all are. Okay, anything more on that, on what we're gonna cover going forward? I think we've got the numbers down, we've got the agenda out early. I think we're good there. Okay, next is committee members' choice. Anybody?
I have some. I've been thinking about this for a while. You know, we went through all the stuff about the notifications that the city puts out, the code enforcement, all this stuff. What if we, as a committee, put out something that would be what I would call maybe a friendly neighbor notice, where instead of it being an official notice, we develop a form, a door hanger, a note, a sticky note thing or something, where if neighbors didn't want to rat on neighbors, but wanted to let them know that they saw something that they knew was against code or something along that line, that they could have a place where they could download something or they could pick up a pad of something called friendly neighbor notices, which say, hey, I noticed your grass has gotten long. Hey, I noticed you've got a bush that's run over the curb or something like that. I know the city has, some things about that. You might want to take care of that before the city gets on it or something like that. But it would be a neighbor to neighbor kind of thing. You do it because you care about your neighbors. You don't want them to, have to deal with the outcome, but it would be sort of an opportunity anybody in this city could do to head off or to notify a neighbor. Doesn't have to be signed. It can be something just almost handwritten, but I don't know what that would look like exactly. But I just thought, wouldn't that be a nice thing to do rather than always having to go to the city to resolve something where you just put a note on the door or something along that line, but we could structure it as a way of supporting your neighbors and of helping the cause.
I think that's,
I got neighbors that'd be afraid to do that.
I would just wholly be worried about the legalities of that.
In what way?
Because one, there's wording, and somebody could take it as a threat or as something else, whatever, if it's not done through the proper channels. And then, do you have the people that are going to inevitably just ruin it? They're going to go put 100 on every person's house they can find. They're gonna put 100 on. I can
Are you talking about me?
I didn't want to say out loud. But yeah, I mean, oh, man.
But I like the intent.
I
I do
like
too.
the idea.
I think there could be
think
a way
it's
to
a
make it work.
neighborly thing.
If you could do something like that in a positive way.
Yeah.
I think there could be a way.
Yeah.
Neighborly
Didn't Inglewood
notices
used to
or something
have,
like that.
I know somebody used to have a thing, alley beautification thing or something, and there was a competition on the street that had the best looking alley in the city.
Oh, that's cool.
And then maybe if whoever won gets a barbecue put on by either code enforcement people or, of the committee or city council would be there or something, that there could be a reward for having the best looking alley, but something with a reward instead of a punishment, and you must do something positive. And who would that go through?
See, I wish Rita was here for that one, because I don't know, on both of these, I wouldn't know.
Yeah.
I
would
I
be-
love the
I would-
idea, and I think that if this were a perfect world,
Yeah,
it
And
would
it's,
work
problem.
great.
believe me, I'm thinking through that too. It's like, how do you structure, how do you tweak it, how do you spin it?
Yeah.
So that it's not threatening. It's merely a opportunity to let somebody know, hey, you've got branches overhanging the street here, or, are you planning on taking care of it? Or it's the kind of thing we would normally do with the neighbors to say, hey, there's something going on here. Were you planning on taking care of it? Oh yeah,
but that can turn
do
sour real quick.
Yeah.
Yeah,
you're right.
And it's better to go through the city, even if we made it simple, made it a positive like that, it just seems like we did something like that a few years ago.
We could ask Rita next time
Yeah,
about,
we could talk about that.
just to see
yeah.
what city council, if they've gone through this or talked about this or mentioned this in a sidebar meeting or something.
Yeah.
Because this has got to come up before.
What about as an extension of like the Snow Buddies program? Like, could you do that?
Like
Yeah.
ritual. or-
Yeah, like not just shovel, but you could do other things
Well,
like,
that could be
I
a
have a weed.
suggestion,
yeah,
like,
instead of,
Now, that
They
would be
do
more
have
positive.
volunteer-
Right.
Do you need help with your
Yes,
yard?
let me
Because I've
know.
seen some
That's actually.
yards that I
They
was
do
kind of
have-
like,
and that
is
does
it somebody
exist,
that
and I
needs some
think
help, an
that
elderly
has
person that
yeah,
needs help?
exactly.
Aren't
Yeah.
there times where you
Yeah.
have volunteer days, volunteer Saturdays, where people go out and help neighbors do
Yeah.
things like that?
there's this Instagram that I follow where some guy just goes to way overgrown properties.
Oh,
yes.
You've seen
I've
that,
seen
right?
it.
And it's
Yes.
like, oh, it's
Yeah,
He's
so
on,
right.
he's on
Very good.
YouTube
Yeah.
also, I've seen.
Is he in Englewood?
No,
No.
he's
He
back.
could be.
No, he gets in trouble sometimes.
But I mean, you find people who just, their thing is like
Yeah.
taking care of weeds and cutting grass, and they have some time and kind of spin it into a social
Positive.
media
Has
positive
it,
thing.
I don't know if you know, has it ever been done? Something similar to Snow Buddies, but yard buddies?
Yeah.
Yeah, why not? Yeah,
Well,
it's a good idea.
Inglewood has the
volunteer for
program
it,
that
actually.
twice a year, the
Snow Buddies I've heard of and I've seen
city
it in the
council
flyer.
and the
Yeah.
churches get together.
Anything other than snow, I haven't seen.
So yes, for all three parts, let's see if I can get through.
So
For
the answer is
nobody's, yes, there was a push 3 or 4 years ago to expand that program, to include grass and weeds, for, those people who couldn't get out, who couldn't get
Mhm.
taken care of. It got nowhere. It was very limited. I think there may have been one person that actually volunteered to help. And that was sort of, there was no interest in it. From my understanding, it just got dropped. For the neighbor notice type of deal, there was actually an incident, and I'll have to ask Dave for clarification on the details, where a citizen was doing that, taking the code offline, made their own notice, hey, friendly, they actually got in trouble for that because they were using Inglewood branding and all that. And the issue was that people, especially newer people to the city, people who didn't know what our notices looked like, who haven't received them before, started thinking, well, these are serious notices, calling us and complaining, and we have no record of it. And then we would get complaints that, well, why are you putting notices on when you have no record of it? Where's the records? We demand the open records. It's not there because it wasn't us, until we got our hand on it and figured what's actually going on. So the determination from the city attorney at that time is that neighbors are more than welcome to print off code from the website as it states and deliver that to neighbors if there's a violation or something they want to take care of. But any other branding or any other notices that aren't issued officially by the city just caused issues. So that's where that sort of ended with that. The alley beautification, I do believe that's part of the new neighborhood rebranding that Madeline's been doing for the
Okay, I
neighbor.
haven't had a chance to go through.
And I think that's something where they are trying to get the neighborhood like leaders.
Yeah.
And that's where they are working on, that's the whole goal of that program, is to bring the neighborhoods together to work as a neighborhood to keep the best neighborhood in the city.
Yeah.
And the start of that program was to identify all the neighborhoods and get those people who are really interested in it. We have some neighborhoods that are signed, they have a whole bunch of people signed up for it, they're identified, and then there's other neighborhoods that there's absolutely no interest in. So that is a challenge, that there may be one group or one block. We see it a lot of the time where there's 2 or 3 houses on an alley that really want to make it as beautiful as they can. They put a lot of work into it. They're out there every few days, but they don't want to extend it past their property boundaries. And that's where a lot of it comes into account. There was an incident, I want to say Thornton, Westminster area, in reference to the guy that goes around and just cuts. You'll notice a lot of those guys on Instagram and that are in Florida, those areas. Their nuisance laws are different, to where if a property is a nuisance, where they can actually go on the property as long as they're not damaging any permanent stuff, they can actually go on the property and clean it up to remove the blight. In Colorado, you can't do that. As soon as you step foot on a property and start doing, that owner can come and sue you for trespassing. So unfortunately, that's why we don't see it here. I would love if we did and had those type of people, but they can't do it because of how the states work for property laws.
But I like the idea to volunteer. Maybe we can bring it up with Rita again and see if they're, because I'll be honest, I had not heard of it. Snow buddies I've heard of, the yard buddy, or whatever we want to call it, I've never heard of that before. I've never heard of an option to do it.
And I can reach out to Madeline too and see if that's something they'd be, because I believe she does a lot of the snow buddies sign up as well.
She does.
I can reach out to her and see if that's something that they maybe, if you guys want to put this winter, the wording together and all that, and then she can just administer.
I mean, I would be happy to, just as long as we get an okay to do it, I think it's an excellent.
Yeah, I can
We
reach out
could
to her.
combine it, you can combine it too with these like friendly notices and say, hey, we were thinking of nominating your yard for a little bit better, a little bit more positive. Or it could be.
You gotta continue to live next to someone.
Yeah.
Be
Yeah.
careful.
I'm a snow buddy. I've been there, I've done it for about 4 years now. And it's very gratifying, by the way. It's also a lot of work. And those years where we have those snows, you're out there a lot. You do your own, and then you turn around and do another one. And so it's a double-edged sword. There's a lot of good feeling comes out of it, but it's also a responsibility. I can't not do it. You know, I told him I was going to be there to do it, and he's in his 80s and he can't do it. So you kind of have to look at both sides of that.
Yeah. I have a big giant snowblower. I go around doing like 6, 7 people's yards every time. Or,
You want to come by?
That's nice. That's very nice.
well, I have some elderly neighbors. I mean, they've been there forever.
Yeah, it's
Just
a nice thing to do.
I
run
got
mine
to
usually
caught my
one
wife
more
and
yard
get
down.
a giant snowblower, so. I was like, hey, I can't keep doing this. We need to, okay. Yeah, gotta help people out. It's not that I want the snowblower, no. But no, I agree, it's a good thing to do. Even though you're out there, and even with the snowblower, you're still out there. And you're like,
It's cold.
yeah, it's cold and you're clearing that thing every 2 seconds, especially on the wet snow days. But you know that there's no way those people could get out there and do it. That's right.
You know, if we're really interested in beautification, and I think we are, I mean, that's really what code enforcement is really so that we lift up and beautify Englewood, make it a better, more enjoyable place to live. I think any like incentive programs, you know, like the most beautiful neighborhoods, the most beautiful streets, or even like a parade of neighborhoods, like a parade, instead of the parade of homes, it would be a parade of, where I grew up in Ohio, they had at Christmas time, they had the most beautiful Christmas lights, and there was always this one street that had the most Christmas lights, you know, and everybody went there, and it was just beautiful, you know. I mean, it was just beautiful. So, I mean, I'm not talking about Christmas lights, but I'm talking about why couldn't we do an incentive program around beautification?
I agree. I mean, that's something I would like to ask Rita. What are the options there for being able to?
Yeah, and why, and could we write a
Incentivize.
grant for it, or
There's
could
grant
we
money,
get
yeah.
a grant money for that and get, you know?
That might be grant money available through sustainability. Right?
To what?
Sustainability has monies available for neighborhood grants to be able to do things on a neighborhood level, not on a personal level, but, and I know that they've been working really hard trying to give this money away.
Oh, well, that
There's
would
money
might be,
available right now for neighborhoods or citizen groups who want to do something in the direction of sustainability, to clean up a corner lot, plant a tree, and they've got money on the table, and they can't find anybody to take the bait. So if there was a project, like beautify a street, plant a tree, put a garden in or whatever, $1,000 grant is a possibility. So if you have ideas or neighbors who might want to do that, we could get you in touch with the right people. But I don't want to put a wet blanket on this discussion, but I'm going to anyways. I think we need to remind ourselves what this committee's about. Code Enforcement Advisory. And there are many noble ideas, there are many great things that are possible. I just think we need to remind ourselves sometimes, what are we here for? And, you know, can we focus? Because we need to. And I've been on volunteer efforts and they run out of steam. They run out of steam. And so that's just human nature too. So you come up with a great idea. It works for 2 or 3 months. And I'm looking at the pollinator garden over at Depot Park. And I'm one of the few people out there in the morning cutting weeds and picking up litter, which is fine. But when we started, good Lord, we had 10 people. We could get that work done in 20 minutes. Well, 9 of those people are busy. You know, so I'm just saying that there's just that other piece of reality to this.
Well, it's probably why the
You know, I
yard
mean, the
waste
intentions are all
never
great.
never got steam before.
That's just my experience. And I'm really happy that we're looking at code, because if we're going to advise anybody on code, we ought to read it before we have any
Yeah.
thoughts. So those are just my.
No,
my-
I think that's a good point.
It is, and
Janice
we
says
put
thank
in the,
Yeah.
we put in the magazine before, things like this, like the snow buddies and other things. I mean, that's why
Yeah.
bringing up the idea of expanding that to summer would be nice, but yeah, I mean, we're here specifically for code, but.
I would think that possibly, I'm not talking about us necessarily doing it, but maybe in conjunction in a collaborative way with maybe sustainability or with the neighborhood groups, that kind of thing. That's all I'm thinking about.
Edie, Rick and I were chuckling when you said Christmas lights. Because we're like, are those low energy Christmas lights?
Yeah, right, yeah, you don't
It
want
just
to
goes
that.
deeper and deeper.
That was all before all that.
Sustainability, just last year got rid of being the group that went around to evaluate Christmas lights. We just got rid of it because it didn't jive with our mission.
Yeah.
You know, we're talking
Right.
about sustainability and we're looking at how many, lights are on that house.
Yeah, right.
And some people loved it. We get to go on a bus and then we get a bite of food and we all judge Christmas lights and others are like, why are we doing it? It's like, anyway, it's funny. And things change, what made sense 20 years ago
Yeah, you're right.
doesn't
It's different
necessarily
today.
make sense. I don't know.
And just to touch on the beautification, ideally that would be a long-term goal, but like you said, we're still enforcement.
You're right.
This comes up every year, the complaint of a yard that's overgrown with grass and weeds. The person, either the owner or the tenant, will go out there, cut it, weed kill everything, and now it's a dirt lot. So it's the two extremes, obviously, but a dirt lot's fully in compliance. Same thing, we'll get the complaint of this house, the paint's peeling and all that. That's all handled under the building department, but as long as it's structurally safe, there's no enforcement that exists in the city to mandate you keep your house painted and looking nice. Englewood is, for a very long time, and I'm sure there's people who have history longer than I do, it's not an HOA. And unfortunately, that's something where a lot of people move to Englewood for that reason. But there's a lot of people that don't understand that, who we get the calls weekly of, well, this is what I want, and this isn't acceptable, or they have a full yard of dandelions, but they're all under 6 inches and they're blown into my yard. Fortunately, that's not something that is within code that we can control. So the beautification, yes, it's a long-term goal, but I think if that's something this group wants to look at or team up with, we have to be very, very careful on how that's done. That we stay within municipal code of really what the goal is and what we're looking at. Because what's beautiful to one person may not be to the other person, and what is not beautiful to anyone is still within code. And that is the choice that people do move into Englewood because it's not an HOA that they're making, and that's why they're moving here. Or have lived here for so long.
You can go to Highlands Ranch if you want all that.
Yes.
I agree.
Then you get told what color you can paint your
And you get monthly
house.
That's right.
Yeah, and if you can have
HOA.
tomatoes in the front yard.
I'll never understand.
Yeah, no.
What else?
I believe we've already covered the topic for future meetings because we're going to be doing the reviews. Everything else will fall in normally for that. As far as the other categories, and the only other thing is adjournment. Unless anybody has anything else, I'll open it up if anybody does have anything else. I'm not positive. Anybody? Oh, no. Okay. Good. Then adjourn.
Okay. Anybody who can give me a ride home, I'd be most appreciative. Sonia, are you going that way or not?